Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my next Facebook Live. This is the Human Experience with Natasha Halliday, and I am so excited to have special guest and a dear friend, Sajel Bellon, with about 17 letters after her name, which one of them is PhD. Um, and Sajel and I are going to talk about suicide risk and COVID-19. Sajel, can I get you to introduce yourself? Because I know I can't do justice. The list of amazing things that you do, I'm not going to be able to say it all. So you go ahead, brag about yourself.
Well, what I'm not is very good with technology because I've been trying to get this on my Facebook page as a watch party, but I guess we'll have to do the replay because I couldn't get it to go. But that's just my technical skills. Where I do specialize is with the mental health and well-being space, working with first responders, high-risk sectors like the front lines, lawyers, CEOs, leaders, people who find themselves in really tough to do jobs or high stress situations. So I specialize in working with them and their families because, of course, we're one organism and we bounce between our work and our home life, and stress impacts both. So I really take a sort of holistic perspective on that. And being a professor in the behavioral sciences, I leverage that as well as tying it into how I deal with my clients in my clinic with that undergo psychotherapy as either individuals or couples. And what I really love about what I do is that, like I said, it's a very integrated approach, and I take the best of what is in terms of organizational development, education, business, and then put it into the context of mental health. So really what it comes down to is human systems. We operate as individuals in systems. Our bodies as individuals is also a system. So when I work with you, I'm working with all parts.
I love that. And, because I'm a mental health professional too, I love that holistic approach. One of the things that when people ask me what difference child and youth care from some of the other parts of the social services is, I'm like, it's our ecological approach because we look at all parts.
Absolutely. And, the sectors that I do work with in the first responder community, law enforcement, fire, military, it's a very hierarchical system. It's very, honestly, traditional. So they are just now sort of understanding that we need to go more holistic. We need to look at all the system, parts of the system. It's not
Right.
just what happens on scene. So, like I said, I really love what I do.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So what I wanted to do is obviously have a discussion about suicide, and this is your area of expertise. And, I'm very comfortable discussing it because of the work that I do, but for many, it's a very uncomfortable topic.
Absolutely.
So what I think will be great is being able to provide a perspective on having discussions about something that's not comfortable, and how to navigate those murky waters, right?
Yeah, and I really, really think that having these tough conversations is really the key to the prevention that everyone is looking for. Like, we're looking to so many other solutions, and topics like funding come into play and things like that. And really, the biggest solution or prevention that we have, it doesn't cost us a dime. It's really about being able to talk about it and unstigmatize the suicidal mind. And that's actually one of the talks that I actually give in the post-secondary sector, as well as in the corporate area. Now we're recognizing that it's a real big problem. So that's essentially what I hope to do with my work, is unstigmatize the suicidal mind, because suicidal thoughts is not what kills. They are actually quite a natural phenomena. So if we are able to understand that and accept that and be able to have conversations like this, I think we would be able to prevent many, many of the suicides that we haven't been able to.
Wow. So one of the first things I wanted to start with was, and I think part of this discussion is going to be educational for people. And so people often think that if you're suicidal, that means you're mentally ill.
Oh
Is
no,
that the case?
absolutely not. Yeah, sorry, I interjected because it's just so not true. Um, yeah, I don't put suicidal risk uh, alongside or contingent with mental illness. Sometimes a person is going through probably one of the worst situations in their life, and it could be that they don't know how to cope. It could be that they've been disconnected from the people that they care about. It could be that they've suffered severe trauma or loss, and just don't know what to do with it. It's the overwhelm. So it can happen as a reactionary thing. It's not necessarily just conducive to mental illness. So yeah, we need to definitely separate those two things. I mean, does mental illness put you at higher risk? Well, it depends on the mental illness, and it depends on your individual situation. Not everyone who's suicidal is mentally ill, and not everyone who's mentally ill is suicidal, right? They just absolutely, to me, there's no connection. It's such an individual thing. So
Right.
we need to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you're differentiating those two because people often correlate the two. And I think what happens is there's a lot of fear in unknown and we walk on eggshells where we don't know.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that is really important is people think having a discussion with somebody about are you potentially suicidal is going to make them think, okay, now I'm going to go do it.
Exactly. And
You
so
respond to
a lot of people shy away from having the conversation. Like if I was to come forward and say to somebody, I've been having these really disastrous thoughts, and I think I might hurt myself, or I don't want to live anymore. People take a step back, they take a deep breath in, and they just don't know what to say, and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, because if they say the wrong thing, am I the reason why they might do something? And it really turns into a very uncomfortable situation for both parties. So one of the things that I suggest around that is, if somebody comes to you and identifies themselves as having suicidal thoughts and you don't know what to say, my suggestion to you is turn it back on them and just simply say 3 words. And you can hashtag this, because I do this with all my talks, is hashtag tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what they need. They need someone to listen. And, it's really hard to respond to somebody when they say, I think I want to kill myself. It's so much easier when they tell us more and give us more detail, because all of a sudden, then we can ask more questions and get more involved. And, it's taking the focus off the killing myself part to the actual issues or problems or obstacles that this person is perceiving. And then it opens the door for us to explore more, or perhaps even buys us the time to connect them to some other supports or resources.
Right.
Those 3 words opens the door to so many other potential outcomes, rather than just shutting that conversation down at that time.
Tell me more.
Yes.
I'm writing that down.
Thank
So
you.
one of the things, and just let me know, because like I said, I do work where suicide comes up a lot. And I've worked for almost 2 decades now in the hospital setting. And so I've done assessments in Emerge, where one of the things I'm doing is assessing for risk of suicidality. And one of the things that I came up with was what I call the language of suicide. Because what I often find is when we can't figure out how to deal with a problem and we want to remove pain, if we have no solution, we think then ending life is a way to remove the pain.
Absolutely.
And some people don't want to die. They just want the pain to go away.
Right. And the way I phrase that, it's, having a suicidal thought you're right. It doesn't mean that we want to die. Perhaps it just means we don't want to live like this anymore. So let's talk about what this is.
Right.
And a perfect example, is a 10-year-old. When we talk about that language or that lack of language, this feeling of overwhelm, this feeling of hopelessness or helplessness, a 10-year-old can say words like, I want to die, because they understand the finality of I want to die, which means that I don't have to deal with everything that's going on in my world anymore. And it means quiet, and it means gone. It means like the pain is ended. but do they really want to die?
Right.
No. So, having, again, that openness to hear beyond just the words of die, suicide, making it so taboo is what's pushing those people away from us or causing them to recede. And what we want to do is for people to come forward. So let's not make it an S word. It's not a swear word. Suicide.
It's certainly not a 4-letter word, and most swear words are 4 letters.
What's that?
I said it's certainly not a 4-letter word. Most swear words are 4 letters.
No. Suicide is just one way to describe something. I want to die means you're in a lot of pain or you're feeling stuck in a situation. Well, let's talk about that.
Right. So we have a question here. Have you looked at the correlation of suicide with people who have physical disabilities or hidden disabilities? One of the examples of hidden disabilities given was type 2 diabetes, where it's something that people can't see, but we know that people are suffering.
Right. Well, thank you, Anthony, for that question. Basically, I don't have the stats right off the top of my head, to be honest with you. So it's not something that I can speak to specifically at this moment. But what I would look at, rather than focusing on the disability itself, is what does the disability mean in that person's life? Has it caused them to disconnect from their social circles? Has it caused them to perhaps not be as social and build connections? Has it impeded their ability to? So I would look at much more than just simply looking at the disability itself and it being a causality to suicide, because there's plenty of people out there with many disabilities, physical, visible and non-visible, that are not suicidal. So to me, I think that, it's never a sort of single cause situation. Our problems, our issues, our perspectives are very dynamic. They're very layered and intricate and far more complex, right? So someone who's at that door or with that window of thinking about suicide is not because of one thing. It's usually from a compounding factor of many things.
Right.
So that's where I would kind of go with that. And I'm sorry, I just don't have the stats handy at this time.
I certainly don't have stats either, but I do know one of the things I've done working in hospital was we did consults around the hospital. So we went to medical wards where sometimes the stress of the medical illness was part of what caused people to have these type of thoughts. And so we certainly know that. What I can say, Anthony, is that there is definitely a correlation between physical illness, whether it's visible or not, being maybe one of the stressors that triggers those types of thoughts. And again, like we've discussed, when you break it down and have those dialogues, a lot of the times it's not necessarily, I really want to die. It's, I want to be removed from this difficult situation. I want to be removed from this pain.
And medication also, like depending on the difficulty, disability, mental illness, perhaps, when we're introducing pharmaceuticals into the equation, there are pharmaceuticals that have been shown to also increase suicidal ideation. So, that's another factor. So like I said, it's not just, usually one thing. It's we look at the myriad of things that the individual is going through.
Mm-hmm. So what I really kind of wanted to look at was, you've spoken a little bit about your expertise with working with people with suicidal thinking and that sort of thing. One thing I've heard repeatedly is people are referring to the second wave of the pandemic, the onslaught of increased mental health concerns.
Absolutely.
A period of isolation or an ongoing period, because we're not necessarily out of it. Financial stress, depending on what's happening with somebody, their work based on, being in this pandemic. So like some income insecurity, just all the uncertainty that we've been living in for months, and our bodies are not designed to hold all that stress for that length of time. So there's definitely a concern, and this is why the government's trying to offer free services. But even for people who don't necessarily need mental health help, there is a concern that there'll be people who will have more thoughts of suicide. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So I know that initially, even my own personal sort of reaction when COVID hit and we saw this instant sort of call to physically disconnect, we even changed the language around it partway through, right? We went from social distancing to physical distancing because it caused a lot of stress and anxiety just based on the language alone. Because when we talk about socially disconnecting, that means disconnecting from our loved ones, disconnecting from our friends, and it really put a sort of panic into people, and we felt that anxiety. So they tried to sort of ease that anxiety by changing the language around it, saying, hey, no, we're not saying you can't connect, we're saying that we want you to physically distance. And so it became a different sort of messaging. The fear at that time, I know for me as a clinician, was that because I believe that social connection and human connection is key, and that isolation and alienation are the drivers towards suicidal thought as well, in my opinion. So they put us at higher risk. That was one of my major concerns around at that time. My other concern was for the front lines, that they are going to be seeing extremely stressful times, hard work, physically draining, mentally draining, higher amounts of death, higher amounts of trauma visually, and experiencing it secondhand as well in terms of the frontline workers. So kind of that's where my focus was. That has actually kind of shifted over time, because what we've also seen, as you mentioned, Natasha, that this has become more of a long-term situation. So that was like the sort of the first reactive wave that we saw. But now, as we've kind of moved on to this longer term situation, we've seen a shift. Now the concerns are around the financial stability, like you said, massive stresses, massive impact on the relational aspects of the financial having on homes and families and couples, the rise in domestic violence at this time, and people feeling stuck in close quarters. The other thing that I noted was the increased use of alcohol or addictive behaviors, also having an impact on this. So we can see that there's been a shift, and the longer this kind of goes on, we are seeing increase in all these types of maladaptive coping behaviors. And that has raised a concern for people. And right. Have we seen an increase? We've seen some pretty high profile suicides in the last couple of months, and not just in North America, from a global perspective. So right. We're talking people that we would normally think of, hey, we don't need to worry about this, or why would they even do that? They're a superstar, they're, a celebrity, they're rich, they're this. What problems could they possibly have? But we're seeing people really, really suffer right now. The other thing that I have recognized is this emotional roller coaster, right? And this lack of sense of control over things. And suicide can be perceived as that thread of control, that sort of relief from this emotional roller coaster, the pain from having to go up and down, and the overwhelm.
Right. Wow. How many times did we hear the phrase unprecedented times? And it's just, we still don't know.
We don't know.
And that's a really hard place for us to be in. And like you said, there's that potential threat of control when, for how long we've been in a position of, you can't do this, you can't do this, you don't have control here, you don't have control there. It's really quite a challenge. It's been, everybody's adapting, and the hard part is, where do you ever settle when things continue to change?
And this is going to sound, I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I really got a shake in my perspective yesterday. I look at North America, and I look at what's happening in terms of, all the debates that we're having right now, the social emergences, the masking issues, the politics, the all kinds of things, right? And yesterday I watched on the news Lebanon is literally disintegrating as a community. Like, people are leaving, people have moved. There's been an annihilation of the middle class. That, you know, people have been thrown into poverty. And I look at situations like that and I go, you know what? Suicide's not just a North American problem. No. You know, and in fact, I think we have very first world problems. For a moment, if we can just sit back and look at the impact that COVID is having beyond ourselves and into a global perspective, I think we would really sit back for a moment and see things a little bit differently. And to me, that really raised so much concern, because there's so many people in much more desperate situations. And to me, my first question went on to people who find themselves homeless, people who are finding themselves starving, can't feed their children, have no job, are used to being self-sufficient people, are now thrown into the angst of not being able to do that. So what's going to happen to them emotionally, mentally, and physically?